Hi everybody, this is B007 back with a movie review podcast. Today we're continuing with our extended edition DVD commentary for the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So hopefully if you've been following along at home, we're now at the start of the Two Towers. And once again, I'm joined by Matthieu.
Hi everyone.
So Matthieu, also known as B007, who contributes to another podcast called Vassals of Kingsgrave. So if you're into your Tolkien and your in-depth rereads, not just of Lord of the Rings, but also the Silmarillion, then you should definitely check that out. And I'll put a link in the podcast post. But Beric, where are you, or Matthieu, whereabouts are you on the reread of the Silmarillion? How far through are you?
We're at the Beren and Luthien chapter at the moment. I mean, we haven't recorded the podcast yet, but we are. The next episode is going to be about that chapter only because it's like a 50-page chapter, so we have a lot.
It's a really good story as well. It's like one of the key ones.
Yeah,
cool.
And it's something that they bring up. They brought up Beren and Luthien in the Lord of the Rings, at least in the first book when they are in the swamp, and they in the extended edition of the first film they also talked about it. Very short.
It's definitely part of that wider universe that you get hints of in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Okay, so the way we're going to do this is we are watching the extended edition. We're going to watch roughly the first half, so I think we're going to break where the discs break, if you have the 2-disc edition. So the final chapter will be of Stewed Herbs and Rabbit. And as ever, there's going to be spoilers for Tolkien. There might well also be spoilers for the latest Hobbit movie, which Matthieu watched recently, and there may also incidentally be spoilers for A Song of Ice and Fire. So with that, I'm going to count 3, 2, 1, play. We're going to start at the very start of the film, and hopefully we'll all manage to keep synced up. So 3, 2, 1, play. So hopefully my Mac and your DVD will be nicely synced.
New Line Cinema. Yeah. Now I get the bluish lettering. Still production. I always try to think that I know a lot about films and stuff, but I just don't know that much about the production process. So all these studio names and stuff, they don't mean that much to me, sadly. And now we get this nice shot of the Misty Mountains, right? As we get into the prologue to the second film. Which I always find this is a good way to start the film, because it ties together what happened with Gandalf in the last third of the first film, right? So this is a good way to sort of mix both stories together and keep us updated and show us stuff that we didn't actually see.
It gives some unity to it. I mean, I really think that the writers had a very difficult task. I think originally I was reading that when this was going to be a 2-film series, that obviously there wasn't a 2 Towers, and then kind of halfway through production they realised they were going to get this third film. And I think that maybe speaks to why it's the film that has the most changes, I think. I'm not sure if it does officially, but it always feels to me like it's the most changed from the book. Yes,
that's also my impression of the film, but at the same time, changes in what way? It's not huge plot departures. It's mostly character stuff and little details, and overall I think the films stay relatively faithful to the books, actually.
Yeah, but we can talk about it when we get to it. I think a lot of the motivation around Balrog. Sorry.
Oh yeah.
This is Gandalf being pretty badass, isn't it?
Yeah.
With the magic staff.
There he goes.
I always thought it was a bit of a schoolboy error to stand on a bridge if you're a Balrog and not realize it's not going to take your weight.
Yeah, but they're spirits. They probably think, oh well, I can survive anything.
Not very practical.
Whatever. Whatevs. And now we get Gandalf, relatively indestructible because, he's landing on a creature made of fire and lava and what's not. But yeah, Glamdring is fairly useful now. Which also I want to get into because originally this scene was supposed to be longer. Like they were fighting, I mean, as they're falling, and then they land in the lake below. So, and there are sketches of the Balrog being like it was described in the books, like as this slimy beast that was coming, that was basically coming out of the water to strangle Gandalf, like a snake or something like that. I mean, so it's there are sketches where they wanted to do that, but it's sad that we didn't get to see this because
But
it's
they're not meant to actually be fighting on the way down, are they? Because that's like just ridiculous that they would actually, in the midst of all that, be able to like aim at something and.
no, of course that's actually pretty. I mean, if you think about it, it's a cool factor. So, yeah. But it's all just a dream, or is it? And
How do you think we're meant to interpret it? Is that Frodo having some kind of ring-inspired, very truthful dream, or is
oh, it's the almighty plot convenience to give him visions. Oh no, I'm actually, I think it's a neat trick to sort of get people to think that maybe Frodo is having visions, but at the same time, we know that there's no possible way that he would notice it. Like there are no supernatural powers that Frodo has. So I'm fairly confident to say that this is probably just a way to let the audience know what was happening to Gandalf again because it was going to be relevant. And here we have Sam basically climbing down his special rope.
there's
But yeah,
something really weird going on with my DVD player insofar as because I'm watching it on the Mac, right? And I can't get the subtitles up in English.
oh really?
So
What?
I can get them up in like Czech, Estonian, Hebrew.
Oh wow, that's because you would expect like a film that's in English to be also be available in English subtitles, right?
Yeah, no, but I put it on auto, and normally that works on the iPad, but for whatever reason it's not showing them. Maybe if I put it
Oh
on full screen it might. Let me have a go. Otherwise I'm going to have the sound on though, which is going to suck a little bit.
yeah, but it's fine.
Let's have a look.
This is not like I mean this is and especially it's good that we notice it now because obviously this is not that special scene. They're just talking about the special rope that Sam has from the Galadriel, and it's sort
The
of what
annoying
ties
thing
it
is,
up.
on the subtitle is they don't even have French or German or anything I actually speak.
Yeah,
There's
that's
got a whole
actually
bunch of
really weird.
languages that I don't speak.
Yeah, this is why I usually watch. I mean, when I do commentaries on films, I watch them on a DVD player or something on my computer, which is
That's so
uh,
last millennium, dude.
oh well, I like DVDs because it's like a physical copy of something that I like, so I always have the feeling that I own it. Whereas if I were to just watch it online, it's like, oh yeah, someone else put it online. It's not actually when it gets taken down, I can't watch it anymore. Whereas with a DVD, sort of, I can watch it whenever I want, even if I'm not online. Uh, yeah, and here we have Frodo and Sam basically still talking about what's going to happen. They talk about Gandalf as well.
Okay, I'm going for Portuguese subtitles because it's the only vaguely Romance language on here.
Oh, yeah. Well, if there's nothing else. Um,
Well, my choices are like Hebrew, Hungarian, Indonesian, Latvian, Lithuanian.
oh no.
But the auto recommended should be English, and that's why I find it weird that it's not happening. But anyway, that's cool. I'll improve my Portuguese by the end of this.
Hmm. Did you
The
did you
eye.
did you stop your movie while you were doing it? Because I just went on, so I'm not
No, no,
sure.
no, I went on too, don't worry.
Because
That's cool.
we're getting the lembas bread.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's more lembas bread. Uh, it's just like I mean, I wouldn't be able to feed off of that for a whole year because that's essentially how long they were gone. So I mean, in the
Really, how
books,
long, so in the books, how long does it take him to walk to Mordor?
it's just a couple of months, right? I mean, the whole journey takes them a year.
It's not very efficiently wrapped lembas bread as well. Like, if you can see the
Oh,
lembas through the leaves. I mean,
yeah,
surely the point of, like, wrapping it in the leaves is to protect the actual bread. So, elves do a better job.
yeah.
Bad
You're
housekeeping from
you're
Galadriel.
terrible food industry.
Yeah.
Oh, and there's the probably the best character in the whole series just popped up. Like,
Do you think so?
just, I think I mean he's the most complex character because like there are lots of criticisms against Tolkien's work that the characters are basically a bit two-dimensional. Like they're a bit too one-sidedly good or evil, especially when you look at who's on the side of the antagonists. Basically, they're all pretty much like evil because evil, and then you have the heroes who are basically unwavering until the very end. Um, and that's I mean, for some people that can be a bit too boring.
But
So
I
I mean,
wonder if that still
film is a bit.
applies. I mean, do you think that still applies in the movies? Because in the movies, they of course give. I mean, they make Theoden a lot more ambiguous, and they
Yeah.
make Aragorn a lot more doubting, and they make Faramir kind of, in a way, more tempted and therefore weaker. So I think they blur the lines a lot more in the movie.
Yeah, because you need to. I mean, it's obvious because it's conflict is essentially necessary for drama to happen. If they all just um, believe uh, strongly in what in their own virtue and everything, it's very difficult to make that compelling. Like at some point, you get okay, I get it. You're Jesus essentially, but no, I like the film version. I think the characters are a bit more nuanced in the films. I mean, they come across that way. In the books, it's much more difficult to sort of maybe get the nuance because there there are some moments where you think, well, this is a bit, the descriptions are not that helpful sometimes in the way that Tolkien describes some of his characters. But I think with Gollum, there's a nuance there that is very visible even in the book. So I think a lot of people have problems with the fact that the characters don't change that much. I mean, there are lots of characters that stay essentially the same. Like Aragorn in the books is a bit different from the film version. In the film version, he has to assert himself. In the books, he's sort of like, "Yeah, I'm awesome. Essentially gonna be, I'm essentially gonna be king at some point. Like, it's good to be the king." But um, yeah, no, I like the fact that they made some characters a bit more mm, complex. I would say. I mean, they, or at least they tried to give them a bit more of a personality. Maybe I'm not sure. I mean, I like the book version obviously a lot, but um, I also think it's important that the films get to do their own thing.
I suppose we should talk a little bit about the fact that, I mean, the major change between Two Towers, the book and movie,
But
is
this is
that,
Gollum is not he's actually black skinned in the book, which is actually really strange to me.
is he?
Yeah, I think he's described like as a sometimes I think it's sort of like he's described as pale as well. I mean it's really contradictory in a way that he's described. So I'm not really sure. Like they talk about it, especially later in the books, where as soon as like a dark squirrel, like one of the rangers when they're looking for him, basically said like yeah I saw this creature that looked like a dark squirrel from the midwood forest or something like that, but I'm not sure. Maybe it's just like there are different descriptions, but it's they changed it a bit because in the first film we saw the first version of Gollum was different from this one. So I mean it looked like they changed his skin color for the second film. I'm not sure why they did it.
That is messed up.
I'm not sure. It's probably also because there's a debate about this. So maybe it's because they felt, oh well, some people think he looks that way, some people think he looks another way. So I mean, the thing is that he's basically a hobbit. So I mean, this makes sense actually if he's just like physically changed, and he wouldn't necessarily change his skin color or something. I'm not sure. I mean, this still makes sense to me. I'm not sure if maybe I just remember it wrong, but yeah, it's I always thought that he was like really that he had dark skin with very bright eyes, so that you would see
See him
how
in the dark.
yeah that's how they would stand out. And I'm not sure. I mean, maybe I just read it wrong or something. I mean, I it's just something that I thought there was a discussion about because basically that's the thing. Like some of the physical descriptions are a bit vague with the characters, but with Gollum it's a bit. I mean, it's a bit different because he looks so strange that Tolkien goes into very specific details. Like in the Hobbit, he has six teeth. I think in the movie they gave him nine teeth. So um, yeah, that's the sort of thing. Like you can't miss out on details like that usually with the character. So it's actually. But I mean, to me, it doesn't take anything away from the character. I mean, I just thought like they had the first version um, in the Fellowship like very quickly in the Mines of Moria, but yeah, it's difficult to. I mean, we didn't get a good look at him anyway, but yeah, it's not a big deal actually to me because I think like it's a bit every. I mean, you saw the animated version, right?
No.
Oh yeah, there was an there was the animated version where Gollum was essentially like dark green, like, and it's like really. I mean, in one version he even looks more like a frog, which is also something that he gets described as like very.
Yeah, you see, that
Frog-like.
doesn't. I mean, he's still quite frog-like in this, isn't he? Kind of slimy, river-dwelling, eating the raw fish, kind of.
Yeah, that's why I think this actually, and we have to talk about it. I mean, the fact that this was nearly. I mean, this was it nominated for an Academy Award for the second film? I think.
I think on the technical awards, it must be nominated in all categories. No.
Yeah, because I thought that there was a point where Andy Serkis thought he was going to get nominated for his acting.
Oh no! He wasn't nominated for acting, was he ever?
No, that's a big deal that people. I mean, people are still pissed at that because it's obvious that without the performance, this character would feel very flat. I mean,
And actually, he's so. I mean, the whole. If you think that the Two Towers, the radical changes that they've taken in the books, what Sam and Frodo do, and they've interwoven it with what everyone else does, which I think is definitely good, and definitely makes it feel like a coherent film. But the Sam and Frodo scenes would not work; they would be totally undermined, and therefore the credibility of the whole film would be undermined if Gollum wasn't believable.
yes,
So this is like totally like the pivotal, I guess, both performance and CGI of the whole film. Like if Treebeard kind of doesn't work, I mean, yeah, it's a shame, but it's not going to kill the film. But this really will.
yeah, this will because it's a character that is essential to not just this film but the last film.
Yeah, you're at the heart of everything here.
Yeah, and here we have the scene, which I think they should have kept in the cinematic version, where the Uruk-hai give them the medicine because it shows a bit. I mean, in the books they make a point of it that it's partly because they're in a hurry, so they have to patch them up essentially. But also, like to me, it says something about their culture because it's a bit. It's just rough and it's not delicate in any way, but it still shows that they are not. I mean, they have they have the society. It's just that we don't get to see it. They have ways of treating their wounded and stuff that we're not privy to. So
They have medical tech. They're not completely savage.
yeah, we just get. I mean, we get to see a lot from the elves and men, but not that much from the orcs. I mean, we get like these are bad
And yet,
guys.
sadly, they haven't invented dental floss.
No, they haven't. But at least these guys can travel in sunlight, which the other ones couldn't. Or at least they would be very weak. So
Doesn't mean you can't stop for 10 minutes to brush your teeth.
doesn't mean no. They have to invent dental floss at some point.
Oh, it always looks like when they force that stuff like down Mary's throat that it's like treacle syrup or something.
Yeah. At the beginning I thought, well, this looks suspiciously like oil or something. I don't know.
Yeah, it's got a horrible sort of texture to it.
Yeah, it's like I don't know, probably something like strong alcohol that you would give someone
Like a
like
port wine or so.
yeah, and yeah, here we get the famous running. Like that's the thing that some people point out. I mean, if you have seen Clerks or even Clerks 2,
Clerks
I mean,
2.
like there's lots of people walking in these films, but yeah, I mean, still, why wouldn't you take advantage of this landscape, basically?
One man's walking as another man's exploring the world, right? So,
Yes, it's not. I mean, if people don't value like getting to see great landscapes and exploring stuff, I don't know. That's sort of to me. Every adventure film has to have some kind of exploration of the world that it's set in. So here they don't have like X-wings or other vehicles at their disposal. So what
X-wings.
what do you have feet for? Walk. And this is also the point where people seem to have a problem with Gimli being too comedic aside. I mean, because he basically gets relegated to the comedic side character.
Oh, but I think that's right. I mean, I think it is sad how it's such a big film and it has to encompass so much that it is a bit of a shame that Legolas and Gimli just become the comic relief. It's
Yeah,
kind of
but I mean, they're
sad.
not that big. That's what I mean. Like these are characters that, I mean, Gimli in the books, he has more depth, obviously, but Legolas I mean, arguably less interesting in the books than he is in the films, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Orlundo Bland, right? That's the joke. The
Yeah.
Mark Kermode way of
Yes.
saying his name.
But I don't think that this name refers to his performance in Lord of the Rings specifically, but rather to his Pirates of the Caribbean stuff. But that's a discussion for another day.
Yeah, but
And
like
here
in
we
both
get
cases, he has a very bland character, right?
oh
Sorry.
yes, and this line, they're taking the hobbits to Isengard is another meme that people have latched onto.
Really? How
I
is
think
that a
that
meme?
it's like some people have said, like, I mean, they've made it into some kind of a song or something, like, it's just like a beat, like a like a rhythm or something, like you always have like like a remix or something.
That is definitely not a meme of the standard
No,
of
no, I'm not saying
one
like
to simply
I'm saying like
one
this is
does not
what the
simply
thing
walk
this
into
was a
Mordor.
thing, I think.
Yeah.
Um, but we should probably also talk about the fact that they use miniatures a lot in these films. Like they really build some of these towers and cities, as
Yeah, it's old
miniatures.
school, right?
Yeah, or like the Tower of Barad-dûr was actually made, and the Orthanc as well, which is I think they should have that should actually be a requirement, because otherwise it looks all too clean and too fake if you just make it up with CG. So having maxitures, as they're referred to, right? Because they
Pack
are
stitches. Yeah, because they're still like these towers are still like 3, 4 feet tall, right? They're not
yeah.
tiny, tiny.
No, that's what I think it's actually much better if to integrate everything into it. I mean, not just replace everything with CG effects.
No,
So
I love it. I mean, I think it's exceptional, and as we said before, it feels very authentic. It feels really real, and I think it's in some ways it's better than the shiny, shiny Hobbit stuff. That's
yeah,
much more recent.
yeah, that's what I mean. And yeah, here we get also the Men of Dunland swearing fealty to Saruman, which we get I mean, we also get the idea of Saruman's voice being actually
Powerful.
powerful to convince these people to take up arms against the men of Rohan. So it's it's likely that, I mean, that's what I mean. Like when they talk about that these books are not allegories for anything, it's very hard to not see a parallel between this and the events of World War II. And it's, I mean, especially if you have like um, the idea of someone who is really charismatic, like convincing a huge army to go forth to exterminate a whole people. It's actually I don't know. It's probably just reading into the story. I mean, it's like people trying to find real life counterparts to what's in the story. But I think that's also important because um, it's not. I mean, that's why I think the death of the author theory is actually pretty important to me, because at some point the work transcends what the author intends, and then because it's at some point it's received by the reading public, and in this case the viewing public. So obviously, if you get something out of it that the author didn't intend, that doesn't mean that it's irrelevant or that it is
The key
invalid.
question, I suppose, in the context of Star Wars is: does the author have the right to
Tamper.
alter the original materials from which those theories sprang?
Yeah, I don't think. I mean, it's difficult because at some point it's entered the cultural consciousness so much that you might say, well, everyone contributed to it in some way, probably to its popularity, to its influence on mainstream culture. So yeah, there are people who say, well, the author should have every right. I mean, because he came up with the original idea, so then it's his work, so he can do whatever he wants with it. But at the same time, if it's in a way that is detrimental to, I mean, in the eyes of a lot of other people, to the original work, then obviously that's going to be a problem for a lot of people. It doesn't mean that he shouldn't be allowed to do it, but it's still that just because you can do it, it doesn't mean you should, right?
Exactly. Just because it can be done does not mean it is to be done.
Yeah, and we missed basically because that's also. I mean, some people. I guess if you just watch the cinematic version, you wouldn't know who Theodred actually was. Here, you get an introduction to. I mean, this is the king's son. This is
It's
important. He's
important.
alive. We're getting him back, and so yeah. Here we have Eowyn, who I actually absolutely love in the films because this is a nuanced female character. This is not like Arwen in the first film, where it's basically just there to represent a love triangle. Here it's actually, partly because they want to make a point.
Yeah, and I think it's partly because I think the actress Miranda Otto has a really beautifully expressive face. I think in a way, she's in a way the heart of the movie, which is weird because as a character she's meant to have this frozen heart. But the way in which she sort of melts for Aragorn and is kind of hounded by Wormtongue, I think it's just really relatable. And I guess maybe it's just a very male macho movie, and you just need a woman who isn't an ethereal elf. I mean, she's the only woman that
Yeah,
we meet, and therefore has feet of clay and makes mistakes, or not makes mistakes, but kind of misunderstands her feelings. And yeah, I mean, it was always a real shame to me that we didn't see more of the sort of Faramir and Eowyn story, because they're two of my favorite characters.
yeah. And we have Grima Wormtongue, who had to actually, I mean, Brad Dourif had to actually shave his eyebrows.
Eyebrows off.
Yeah, which I don't know. I'm probably not comfortable. But yeah, I also noticed that they give him also one eye lens or something like that. So
Oh, so his eyes are kind of slightly weird.
yeah, they're of a different color, I think. But we get a good sense of what the character of Grima Wormtongue is about in just this one scene thing.
What's sleazing about?
Yeah, that he's basically lusting after her.
I
So
mean, a criticism of the film is that in the film, it kind of the makeup that they've given to Theoden is very extreme. Like it looks like he's kind
yeah,
of bound in cobwebs, and the implication is that he's literally been possessed by Saruman.
yes, that's probably how it comes across in the film. I mean, I also thought, yeah, well, this is the way they're doing it in the film. Uh, this is not how it is in the books, but at the same time, it's like this gets the point across pretty well without actually, if the king was actually reasonable most of the time, and I mean, then you wouldn't be able to. I mean, and this is not a book where you can have hundreds of pages to get this across, so you have to take a shortcut, basically.
But I think, like my problem with that is that I think if he looks genuinely that decrepit, then he would have been overthrown by his son or by his nephew. But like the people like Denethor who look basically still normal, but underneath have this really rotten motivation, are actually far more dangerous than the ones who very
Yeah,
physically outwardly look decrepit.
yeah,
And so I think it's just a shame because it kind of in a way takes away the agency of Theoden if he's just possessed, and then Gandalf comes around and like casts off the spirit, and then it's kind of in a way it diminishes him, like his agency in a way.
but at the same time, I think this is actually better in a character arc way. I think because then he can grow much more as a character. You notice it more. I think by the end of the third. I mean, once you've seen all three films, you notice like this guy used to be that way, now he's this way.
Although
So
it's basically the same character arc as Aragorn, isn't it? Because in a sense, both of them are reluctant to do their duty and to lead their men. Whereas, it's a while since I read the book, but my impression from the book is more that once Theoden has had the kind of the spell broken, so to say, then he rides off to war in a very positive, deliberate way. And I mean that also because he has Erkenbrand there as a character as well, which helps. But in here, he doesn't go to Helm's Deep as a proactive thing. He goes to Helm's Deep as a defensive
defensively.
measure. Yeah, and it's kind of like Aragorn has to rouse him to action to ride forth one last time. And he's almost a much more defeatist character, and in that respect, to me, he feels more like Denethor, whose sin is the sin of simony, right? It's defeatism. So I think it kind of it blends the. It doesn't leave enough clear blue water between the two characters in a way.
Oh, but to me, actually, by the time the third film rolls around, I think you see the differences because you see that basically Theoden has been able to overcome his despair in a way that Denethor is incapable of doing. So I think
but it's two characters reacting to the same arc in a way, but differently. Whereas in the books, they're just incredibly different.
Yeah, of course. But yeah, I mean, this is probably why some people feel that the second film is not the best because it takes too many liberties with the source material, but at the same time, I feel like the core essence is still maintained. So to me, it's not a big problem in the end.
Oh, I don't mind. And in a way, I think the changes are largely to the good. Like I said, I love the fact that the Sam Frodo stuff is...
Phil Mamiya, as people have been calling him, right?
Yeah, exactly. I like the fact that it's all mixed up, and I like the fact the elves show up, and in general, and the Theoden stuff maybe changes his motivation, but it's incredibly visual and cinematic to see him go from this cobwebby old decrepit dude into this great leader of men. So I think the changes are big, but they work, and they're necessary to keep the plot moving forward. So
yeah, but we missed out on the orc dinner now because obviously they are. I mean, yeah. If you're just a normal orc, don't go around these guys. They're big bullies. And yeah, Grishnak obviously is a bit. I mean, his role is a bit reduced in the film because in the books it's implied that he knows about the ring and he wants to get it for himself. But here it's just because they're all starving and so they want to eat the hobbits. But yeah, I just think this is a good way of creating confusion. Just because you don't know exactly who the Riders of Rohan are, and so now that they're attacking the orcs, you're thinking, well, why are they doing what they're doing? Like, what is their interest in doing this? And yeah, you're sort of led to believe that Pippin's being killed by a horse. But and yeah, Legolas trying to get philosophical. Like a red sun obviously means blood has been spilled, right? So it's like if you watch an eclipse and you think, oh shit, world's about to end. But yeah, now this is actually rather well done. Like you just, for a second, you don't see anything, and then you see sort of all these riders arrive, going towards the camera. Which I also think most of these are actually real people on real horses, right? I mean, most of them are not.
Yeah, totally.
CG,
and a lot of them were women, actually. Apparently.
Yeah, I did not know that.
Wow. It's such a macho kind of like getting your swords out scene, though. It's hilarious to me.
Yeah, this is like the Mexican standoff.
Yeah, it's such posturing. It's just so ridiculous.
Oh, wow.
But it is impressive just when you see all the horses wheel around. That is pretty cool.
Yeah. I also think it's a good choice to replace Erkenbrand with Eomer.
Oh, really? Okay.
Because I think this actually is what narrative economy means. Because you actually get to do something with him, because he's relevant to Eowyn and to Theoden. Whereas Erkenbrand is a good soldier in the book, but it's not like you have a big investment in this guy. Whereas Eomer you meet in the chapter, and so he's much more relevant to what's going on.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, I think it just makes more difference when we get not having Erkenbrand, when we get to the sort of going to Helm's Deep kind of stuff.
Yeah, but it's because, I mean, I'm just talking about it now because they're obviously riding north, right? So that's when Gandalf comes in later. But
yep.
And this is also very important that he sort of reveals to Aragorn that he's of the king's family. And well, they say he's poisoned the king's mind, right? So it's at this point you're not exactly sure if the king is actually possessed or not, which I like because
I always thought it was weird though that Éomer would give away so much information to some random people like trogging through the land. Like, don't wash your family's dirty linen in public. These guys might be enemies. You're revealing a major weakness.
He's been banished. He's a reason to be angry. He's being
Yeah, but it's still a bit
in him.
douchey. I mean, it's basic.
Yeah, but yeah, Aragorn basically also spilling all his secrets. Like, we're looking for two friends who are like hobbits. Like, do you know them?
Yeah, but it's like Brienne, like trying to find Sansa. Like, how do you be
Yeah,
stealthy when you basically need to ask everybody if you've seen someone? It's a really tricky thing.
yeah. Except that this is less tedious in the long run, I think, because it's not much time is spent on this.
Have you seen my sister? Yeah, this is much
Yeah.
less tedious.
Uh, yeah, but at least he's Eomer seems you're sort of meant to feel that there's a bit of an antagonism here between these people because they don't know each other, but at the same time you can see that Eomer is definitely he has empathy for their loss, so or their supposed loss, and that makes him more sympathetic. I mean, it starts out much more antagonistic and becomes much more friendly in at the ending of by the end of the scene, I think. Um, and so I like the fact that it's not obvious character trait stays consistent until point X where a character has to change. Um,
Yeah, no, I agree with that. That's definitely true.
and yeah, and now we see what they do with orcs, basically. Like,
Oh, it's so horrible.
yeah, I mean the book is actually which I actually find it is also like a bit
I mean, like that little,
gives
like the arm bone, like that little skeleton.
yeah,
Oh,
and they actually in
like
the books I
poking
think
around in it.
yeah,
Jesus.
and in the books they actually make a point that Eomer and Ugluk are fighting against each other, like in a one-to-one fight that supposedly, I mean, it's phrased in a way that you're led to think that
Oh,
it's
that's the
actually fair.
moment when Aragorn kicks the helmet and breaks his
Yeah,
foot.
that actually happens in real life, and I mean, he
He
actually,
looks in pain.
yeah, he did because he actually really broke his toe there.
Ah, that's method
Yeah,
acting at its truest.
yeah. Well, the lengths you go to for a good performance, right?
And then, of course, as he falls to his knees,
Yeah,
he's gonna start tracking.
yeah. Because I mean, he's still Strider. He has to show that he has some skills in tracking animals
Oh, here
or
we go.
hobbits
The
or
horse bearing down.
yeah.
It's like CSI Middle
Yes.
Earth, isn't it?
Uh, but
Oh.
you know,
And the bullet went through and through.
yeah,
It's a little bit ridiculous in retrospect.
yeah. Of course, he wouldn't. I mean, but yeah, he's supposedly one of the best. So you would. I mean, he's like Sherlock Holmes here. Uh,
I just want him to stick his like dagger into a white baggie of white powder and
uh,
taste it. That's what all TV
they got
detectives
Hobbit
do.
weed. They got Hobbit weed for that.
Exactly.
That's where they need the hobbits.
Okay.
Rather more selfish than I thought.
This is actually kind of quite good fun with Portuguese subtitles. I would recommend it.
Oh, really? Uh-huh. Yeah, to me, it's just because when I don't have the sound necessarily, I like to read to be able to read the subtitles. Because sometimes, I mean, it's been a long time since I watched the second film. Because usually I watch the first one or the third one, the second one less often. Um, but yeah, now we are at Fangorn Forest, and this is also part that they cut short because obviously showing the White Wizard basically come to their encampment, at night and stuff. It's probably, I mean, it's probably a bit confusing, especially if they have to reveal who he is pretty early on. Um,
Yeah, but I think it's a bit of a Tom Bombadil situation where it is kind of fun world building stuff when you're reading it, but in terms of pushing the plot forward,
yeah,
I'm not sure you need all the Fangorn stuff. Although, in fairness, they do stretch it out, don't they? Because in the books, Treebeard's kind of like, yeah, shit, let's go to war. Whereas
yeah,
in the films,
that's true.
again, everyone has doubt in the film. So Aragorn has doubt, and Theoden has doubt, and then Treebeard has to be persuaded.
Yeah, because I mean, I think that's it's also. I mean, the matter of despair in the second film is a bit more clumsily handled than in the third one because they actually talk about hopelessness and stuff. The men say that it is hopeless and everything. I think the fact that you have to sort of they created doubt where, I mean, it was already clear that this was a very difficult situation, and that some, I mean, you could have to show it without having people talk about it explicitly.
Oh, the waking up of Treebeard is so cool.
Yeah, basically raising his eyebrow, right?
It's such
It's
a
like,
like it's such a kids film like trick, but it's just so brilliant.
but
Ah,
it's
there
it's
you go.
it's it's cute because he's not. I mean, Treebeard is not necessarily meant to be that scary. I mean, obviously in the books, I think he's not actually described as a tree, but rather, they're troll-like figures. The ends.
Yeah, they're tree shepherds.
Yes,
So
and so I'm not sure that. I mean, in the film, they obviously wanted to make it much more like a talking tree. But at the same time, I think this works actually really well. And you wouldn't. I mean, when I watched it because I used to watch these films in French first, so I at first was not aware that the same actor who plays Gimli also does the voice of Treebeard.
it's so cute. In Portuguese, he's a pastor de floresta. He's like a pastor of flowers.
Oh,
It's so cute.
uh,
Oh dear, I'm losing it. Uh,
and
apologies
it's
to
also
if the listener happens to be Portuguese. Apologies for that, and I'm sure my pronunciation was terrible.
don't worry about it. And hobbits. They actually, I mean, he doesn't know what hobbits are, but then again, these woods are relatively small compared to what they used to be.
And it's not like he's wandering around, right? Like he's probably
No,
never left the forest. So
yeah, but the Endwives apparently did, so they went away. Um, and yeah, that's also, I mean, obviously the orcs have no consideration for the environment, rather like, big oil companies or something.
yeah, the orcs are basically BP here, or
Yeah,
Halliburton.
they're the Koch brothers.
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
Saruman is actually. Saruman and Sauron, they are the Koch brothers. Two bottles of evil next to each other. And yeah, no. I mean, I at first when I because I as I said last time, I watched the movies first before I read the books. So by the time I watched the second film, I had already started reading the second book, but
So the first
still,
time you saw the movie, who did you think the guy in white was?
I actually thought that the guy that actually the White Wizard was Treebeard after he let them fall to the ground. Actually, first I thought, well, is Treebeard just a creature that Gandalf transformed himself into?
So he
That's
then walks
yeah,
back into a wizard.
and
Okay.
yeah, because then because he's right in front of them, so it's like he would have been like standing there with his back to Treebeard as he's walking to them, and then Treebeard lets them fall in front of his feet. It's like yeah, but yeah, that was before I read the books. But here it's obviously meant to imply that it's the White Wizard, but you don't know who the White Wizard actually is yet.
Oh, this is such a beautiful recreation
Oh
of
yeah.
trench warfare.
Yes, and this is obviously this is and again allegories really. You don't have any real life event you put into this.
This
It's
to
like
me is always how I
was
imagined Passchendaele, because wasn't Passchendaele particularly wet and like always remember when we did this in school that in Passchendaele that it was so rainy and swampy that when the horses were shot, they would sort of putrefy in the sludge and just become this sort of like decaying, putrid, massive. Ugh,
yeah,
yeah,
and
horrible. And
obviously
Gollum's like, no, that's okay. I can eat a wriggly worm.
yeah, but because he has a healthy diet, and yeah,
He's definitely equal opportunities. He will eat pretty much anything.
except Lembas bread, he hates them. Yeah, but that's because obviously ring makes you hate elvish things probably. So that's yeah, and they definitely. I mean, this is probably a good point to talk about the antagonistic relationship between Gollum and Sam because this has been played up in the
Jealous
films a lot.
boyfriend.
Yeah, something like that. But it's been played up in the films a lot more than
But
it is in
again,
the
isn't this
books.
so relatable? I mean, I think it's
Yeah.
Everyone's had situations in life when one of their friends starts hanging out with someone else that you can see, whether it's a boyfriend or a friend, where you can see that they're bad news, but that person can't, and it's one of the most frustrating things because you
Mm.
can't say it. Like it's got to be that they have to see it for themselves.
Yeah.
So,
Because you can't say, well, I don't want you to hang out with this person.
or if you go on and on about why they're bad, then it just looks like paranoia, like you're
Yeah.
prejudiced or something.
Oh
So
yeah, you're possessive of the other
yeah,
person,
it's
right? Like,
just it's
I don't know.
very very.
Yeah. Sam obviously doesn't trust him because he has heard a lot of bad things about him. So
And
yeah.
also look at him. I mean, he just looks like a
Yeah.
rogue.
Yeah. He looks like, yeah, some kind of. I mean, he looks skeleton thin, really. So it's
Yeah, but he's wiry. I mean,
yeah.
he's strong. You know that if it came down to a fight, he'd be a tough
So
customer.
this is like reference to the Battle of uh Dagolat, basically, where they had in the Second Age, probably, where they, oh yeah, what I'm saying, the Second Age, of course, yeah, where the elves fought against the orcs, on this plane, and essentially,
So who are the people in the peeps in the water?
yeah, they're from basically, the army of the Last Alliance, basically.
Toros mortos,
Mm.
elfes,
And
omens e mortis.
dead marshes, right? And yeah, this is also something I
The
think
pantanos
is a,
mortos in Portuguese, as
this is
well.
this is actually a very good way of creating um, like a horror film like atmosphere. I would say, like when you see, I mean, even if it's daylight, right? You see all these dead faces in the water, and then at some point, one of them just opens its eyes,
Yeah, I remember very
right?
clearly the first time I watched
It's
this in
like
the cinema, and like people like literally go,
you don't even need jump scares or anything, which is like, this is also because Peter Jackson used to make horror films as well, right? It's not
well,
like
comedy
he's
horror.
yeah, comedy horror, but still, uh, it's not like he's new to this. And this obviously I like a lot because it suggests like all these spirits in the water, trying to get out. Um,
Does
and
this whole falling in the water thing happen in the books?
um, I don't think so.
And seeing all these like ghoulish
It's-
spirits.
I think they see the fires, right? They see like
Mm.
all these little fires that apparently the dead.
Kind of feels
Like,
more Peter Jackson than Tolkien. It's brilliant, but it's definitely his sensibility, I think, rather than Tolkien's.
yeah, yeah, of course. This is much more. I mean, but this is obviously a very interesting sequence, I think, because it makes sense for the director because it's like with his background, obviously, you, you would want to take opportunity, uh, and yeah. This is also something like Frodo is stroking is looking at the ring, right? And then Gollum is talking about the ring at the same time, right?
Oh yeah,
Which I think is
definite
I think
parallels.
here, yeah, and yeah, it's also a moment where people get to empathize with Gollum a lot more than they probably would at the beginning of the film. Um, and it's also like this strangeness to Gollum, right? That he sort of um, doesn't talk to Frodo and Sam actually that much, and yeah, he just like I don't know, he just feels like I mean he's the kind of guy who basically says, "Well, I'm much more complex than you people can know, so I won't even bother explaining myself to you."
So my precious in Portuguese is I think o nosso precioso.
Yeah, our precious, right? Or is it our precious or
Yeah,
my?
yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, and so now we get, I mean, the name drop Smeagol, which we didn't have in the first film, but which actually gets mentioned in the first book, right? Because the whole Gollum backstory actually gets explained in book one.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
but in the film, I think it's a good way to have it be the prologue of the third film, basically, where everything is sort of like this is the deciding film, this is the last chapter. So everything that's relevant has to be uh, given to us at the beginning of the last film, I think. And that's obviously the most relevant part of the story for that character. So yeah, I'm glad that we didn't get it right here. But I think they also there are stills out there where they had, they wanted to have sort of dream sequences where I think Frodo would sort of turn into a golem-like creature. I think something like that.
Hmm.
Um, and they had like makeup with Frodo like with longer hair, like and I don't know, like shadows under his eyes and stuff, and bad teeth and everything. So they took that out, but I would have, I would have liked to see what they would have done with it, but at the same time I think we don't need that
Exactly.
explicit
I think
stuff.
it would have been too heavy-handed in a way. It's much better
Yeah.
just to sort of hint at it in a sense.
Mm. And here we obviously got the
Nazgul.
Nazgûls again, right?
I just think the Nazgûls are just pathetic.
They are. That depends on.
They're
I
the
mean,
most
they're basically
incompetent
they're,
PIs ever. I
they're
mean,
unkillable at
do
this
you
point.
want? Yeah, but it doesn't matter if you're unkillable. You're incompetent. Like you
Yeah.
can be
Okay.
incompetent for eternity. It's like if you want someone to find something, hire the A team. Don't hire the Nazgul.
Oh, okay. Well,
I mean, like they're so close to him so often in like in the
yeah.
Shire and now here, and then they just like it just feels like very simply they can be put off.
It's. I mean, they're not all powerful. They're still like. I mean, they're human beings that basically uh, got turned into ghosts. They're not divine beings of any kind. So I'm not sure why they would have special power. I mean, special powers beyond the ones that they got under Sauron's influence. But at the same time,
I
it's
just think
like
they're made up like to be kind of like the embodiment of Sauron and his like evil henchmen and
yeah, they're
well
just
maybe they're just on a long line of evil henchmen who are just stupid. I mean
they're
that's
just
that's a
meant to
good
be
thing.
scary. They're just meant to be scary and weird, because no human being gives, that kind of scream, like makes that kind of noise or something. It's like you don't see it, but you can hear it, and so you're asking yourself, what kind of thing would basically sound like that. So, and since you can never actually see them, that makes it much more. That probably makes it much more scary. Like this sort of emptiness at the heart of the Black Riders, I think is what he meant to convey to people. Um, but yeah, in the films, maybe they come across as some of. I mean, like in like stereotypical secondary characters, like it's like these henchmen characters.
Yeah, like the Bond villains who are going to tell you everything before killing you so you can escape and you have the full plan.
Well, they didn't do that on Weathertop. They went straight for it.
But again, like Shere Khan the tiger, they're scared of fire. It's pretty basic.
Yeah. And here we get like this is a nice bit of tension building. Like they we must be quick. And like they're turning around, and then basically this big Spielbergian flash of light. Yeah, and I like the fact that they got Christopher Lee and Ian McKellen to record the same lines, and then mash them together.
Yeah, but isn't that a little bit cheating for the poor people trying to keep up at home? It's like
Yeah,
deliberately
but it's
messing
like
with
you
us.
want to keep the surprise off as long as you possibly can until the point that you actually need to reveal
And
it.
even
Like,
Legolas with his super elfin
yeah,
powers.
you can't see it
Yeah.
show yourself, but you can see it. Like the staff is not Saruman's staff, so you basically
Is that the one time when Legolas actually like gets shit wrong?
yeah,
Oh no, we're blinded by the magical light.
yeah, and then
I noticed Gimli's well to the back. Yeah, guys, don't worry. Aragorn, you go to the front.
and he says, "Well, I am Saruman," rather as he should have been, right?
Yeah, tricky little fucker. I mean,
Which I find kind of interesting as a concept, right? There's sort of a task that's being assigned to each one of them, and Saruman obviously failed. Not he failed in a less than well. I mean, he obviously did it deliberately, but at the same time, it's like there has to be someone who carries out this obvious task that has been assigned to the entity that is Saruman, right? So Gandalf has to obviously fill that role now, in a way.
yeah.
Um,
But I just, yeah.
And I think like it's I mean Gandalf obviously is much more fun when he's grumpy. Like he's grumpy in a certain way as Gandalf the Grey, but he's grumpy in a different way as Gandalf the White. But Gandalf the White's grumpiness is not as endearing to me.
No?
Uh, no, because I like the old like wizard in tattered clothes and a big hat, much
Yeah, he becomes a bit up
guy
himself,
in
doesn't
white.
he, as Gandalf
He
the White?
uses like Jesus, uh,
It always
something
struck
like
me,
that.
especially because I love Pippin in Return of the King, and he's so mean to Pippin. It's like,
Well,
yeah, war's
because he
coming, we're
knows
all doomed.
because he knows that Pippin can do actually can actually be capable when he wants to, but most of the time he isn't. So he has to sort of like it's basically like army camp. You sort of try to get a reaction, like try to get the recruits to basically react in a way and saying like, no, I'm not a screw up basically, and they try to prove themselves. I think this is sort of what Gandalf tries to do with Pippin, but obviously Pippin doesn't see it like
What
that.
do you think of this cinematic depiction of the sort of the rebirth kind of thing? I always thought it was quite effective,
Oh
given that
yeah,
we don't really know how it
because
happens.
it's
And neither does Peter
ethereal.
Jackson. They sort of just show him in close up, kind of like doing some freaky, I don't know. I always thought it worked really well.
Yeah, I think it's actually it suggests like that he went to obviously a different uh ethereal. I mean, a different if I can say it like that. I mean, a different ethereal plane. Basically, it's like um going through you know to a different place outside of the physical world. Basically, I like the the fact that he mentions the stars and everything. It's like, and you go through basically I'm not I'm basically through space, but yeah, it's um I like the fact that we get the connection between Gandalf and the world beyond, basically, right? The world that the Valar inhabit, which we are not going to see in any of the films. So,
Yeah, it's there.
um,
It's hinted at, but it's not for
yes,
us.
no, it's it's that's the stuff for people who basically read the Silmarillion and stuff. And yeah, I can see why lots of people don't want to read that because it's not like a real narrative. It's basically a history book for Middle Earth, which you would think, well, why would someone spend that much time to develop this world when no one's going to? I mean, when it's not actually a real story or something like that, but
Well, it's a
um,
different, yeah.
it's a different way of. I mean, it's like this the Silmarillion basically is also based on notes. It's not, he didn't finish it himself. I think Christopher Tolkien did. So um, yeah, it's a different kind of book. Um, but it fits into the mythology of the world, which I like, and which I obviously enjoy a lot. And here we get Shadowfax, who basically who has more significance in the book, right? Because he actually Theoden tells Gandalf the last time he is in Rohan, he tells him to get out, and he basically takes he's allowed to take a horse, but he takes not just any horse, he takes Shadowfax, the king's steed. So that's
It's pretty boss, isn't it?
yeah, well, so yeah, Gandalf, is obviously the man, right? So
This is a beautiful scene of a horse just running in, galloping in there, isn't it? It's
yeah,
magisterial.
but not as nice, I think, as the scene here where Treebeard is basically uh giving this and making this elegy of the Entwives, right? Or
Yeah, yeah.
I like I mean, I like this idea that basically, Treebeard has a, a good memory of things that were there much longer. I mean, in a time much older than where we are now. So, um, and yeah, I just like. I mean, some people find the end scenes probably a bit boring because they're slow, but
It's
I think
kind of the point. I don't find them
that's
boring. I find them quite kind of. I think they're
elegant.
meant to be tense because you want it to speed up and it won't because he's being obstructive and
Yeah,
I think that's exactly the point. I mean, I may not agree with it necessarily, but I think the screen adaptation, they were trying to put in tension, to have a stumbling block to the Ents going to war, because in a sense, in the context of this 2 hour, or sorry, 4 hour now film,
Oh, this is lovely. I love
Merry and
this. It says,
Pippin.
"Come back to me," like, and you
Yeah,
see these mountains
I
with
know it
everything.
is beautiful. But Merry and Pippin get to the Ents very quickly, so if the Ents then suddenly decide to war within 2 seconds, Merry and Pippin have nothing to do for the rest of the movie. So
Yeah.
there has to be this dramatic tension of can they persuade them?
Yes.
And I think one of the writers said it makes the hobbits more than just Ent baggage, because otherwise, if the Ents just decide and
Yeah.
for their characters, and in a way that's right because you've got to get both of them to a position where they're going to take these momentous decisions about the part they're going to play in this war. So you've got to see them maturing and becoming more involved. I think not
Yeah.
just
If
like
they,
messing around, drinking and stuff.
yeah, I can see like if the ends were just to decide for them by themselves that they were going to uh, intervene at some point, that would basically not advance. I mean, Mary Pippin would be stuck just at the same place that they were at the beginning of the film, which is not a good dramatic structure. Obviously, you have to develop the characters, otherwise, especially if they are as relevant as Mary and Pippin are. So you have to basically make sure that they grow up at some point. And yeah, basically, facing the possibility that they might not succeed in convincing the Ents is actually a pretty real fear because obviously, um, yeah, with whatever Saruman is doing, they are very much aware of what Saruman is uh, going to do if not nothing intervenes, right? So,
And also, you've got to bear in mind, from their point of view, at this part of the movie, their two best mates have gone off to whatever, who knows, certain doom, failure. They've run off without them, without saying goodbye.
mhm,
They've watched the man who should have defended them turn against them.
yeah,
They've watched the wise wizard who was leading them die.
mhm,
And they're in a very, very dark place right now. To them, end times are a coming, and
yeah.
there's an urgency to their actions that I think is really nicely played out here.
I just have a question because we read a lot of A Song of Ice and Fire, and George R. R. Martin said that he wouldn't have brought Gandalf back if he had been given the choice to do it, because he felt that this was basically taking away the consequence of Gandalf dying. Because obviously the hero journey dictates that the mentor basically dies, and yeah, the hero has to go on without the mentor at some point. So bringing Gandalf back, even if it's as Gandalf the White, is a bit. I don't know how you stand on all this.
What, because it's sort of infantilizing Aragorn that Daddy always has to come back and bail him out?
No, not just not in that sense, but that obviously it takes away maybe the finality of death in the world of Middle Earth, because then some people who have not read the books might think, oh well, why am I worried for these characters if some of them are just going to come back from the dead, right? I mean, I can see that point, but at the same time, it's made clear that this is not a natural thing. This is not
Yeah,
something
and
that's happening like every day or something.
it's weird, isn't it? I'm not sure how it's done in Tolkien or Peter Jackson, but I'm just very conscious of the fact that even like there's a point now with Song of Ice and Fire where too many people have come back from the dead, where now I find it has cheapened the concept of death.
Yes,
Like I
that's what I
just I
also
just don't
felt.
believe people have died when they've died, and the whole thing about George R. R. Martin is he's not afraid to kill off key characters, but now it's kind of like it's almost laughably the opposite. But there's something about the way it was done when I first read this book, because I read it for watching it, that I never thought that even though Gandalf had come back, that this was an option for everybody else.
Hmm.
Which is, I don't know how that was done, but it just never felt like
Yeah,
this was some weird Deus Ex Machina and it was going to be applied liberally.
because
So,
Gandalf basically doesn't. I mean, he leaves it up to everyone else to make their decisions. He doesn't
yeah.
actually. Yeah, he basically just stirs. I mean, a lot the fire, but I mean, basically wants to um, make sure that people get the incentive to make choices. Right? He doesn't actually intervene all that much. He basically refers to himself as a stone rolling across the land, basically, right? And that's why I think it's even if he comes back from the dead, like what what is it going to do? It's like Gandalf still it makes it absolutely clear that people have to make their own choices. Still, that even if he came back from the dead, like he couldn't defeat Sauron on his own, right? I mean, he just like there's basically they say there's no hope unless you destroy the ring, and then even resurrection is not going to save you. Um, if
Should we talk about the design of Mordor?
Oh yes, I
Because it's one of my favorite bits of design. I think it's so the Black Gate. I
yeah,
just think it's just stunningly well done.
it's like everything like very hard metal and very dark and brooding and everything, and then obviously the trolls opening the gate. Um, and I also find like these are Easterlings that just walk by, so we don't see them again, which I find a bit sad because this is a very cool design for them. It's like
Yeah, it's awesome, awesome helmetry.
yeah, it's like, and this is the sort of thing like this is where you might say, well, there is some. I mean, because George R. R. Martin writes about that sort of stuff when he says, well, there's beauty in war as well as horror because you have the banners and you have everything, you have the glorification of it all, and I think that this is actually an example of this where you can say, well, these uniforms are actually pretty neat, right? It's sort of the idea like, oh well, these guys are off to fight and do something like that to them seems probably awesome, but at the same time it's not. Um, and yeah, Gollum trying obviously to make sure that nothing happens to the ring, that he's not gonna get near Sauron. Um, but
And isn't that
it's
a point that Faramir makes later on, where I think he's just killed some Haradrim or something,
yeah,
and he's saying to Frodo and Sam, like, who are you guys just wandering through the lands? And they're like, we're those who are enemies of the ring should be on our side. And he's like, well, I'm sure that little kid who just died felt he was doing the right thing. And,
yeah.
it's a good point.
And we obviously now, I mean, obviously the gate is going to be very prominent later on in the film series.
For
So
Frodo!
yeah, we haven't. I mean, but at the same time, it's like we don't. I mean, do you also feel like the geography has a bit changed between films because we see them coming down a hill here, right? But at the end, like when they're having the big battle, it's like a plain basically. It's very very. It's not like this
Um,
slope
yeah, I guess
slope
so.
right.
I never
Big
really thought
valleys.
about it before, but yeah, you're probably right.
Maybe it's just too far away to be. I mean, because they're not inside of the gate here.
Such
They
a
can be
cool
seen here.
scene. I mean, just seeing like the Eastlings just marching off, that just
And
makes me
you have
happy.
just also the orcs basically just blowing the horn and stuff. It's all very and it's all very serious because and that's probably also why people maybe object to the films, maybe because they feel like, oh well, this is just fantasy. Why is it taking itself so seriously? But I just feel like if it didn't, then it wouldn't work basically.
Absolutely. It's like the best, what was, the best comedy, the best spoof comedy is when the people within it, the actors, take it absolutely seriously. When
Yeah,
you play it, you don't play it for laughs, you play it seriously, and that's what's funny.
yeah. If
All of
you
these things, you've got to commit to them. Just because it's fantasy, why would you not commit to the universe and commit
because
to the
people might just
moment?
say, well, this is all these are all like silly fantasy creatures running around, doing stuff
Yeah, but
basically.
a battle's a battle, and if it's played
Yeah, of
earnestly,
course.
it's valid, and
Sure.
it's no less valid to Tolstoy describing the Battle of Borodino in War and Peace, which is still like basically historical fantasy recreation.
Yeah.
When you watch Sergei Bondarchuk's sort of 4-hour epic War and Peace film, it's the
Yeah.
same thing. People
Of
dressed up
course.
in antiquated uniforms doing battle formations. So
Yeah. And here we get something that, I also found like interesting, like in the books that they sort of drink the end thing and get taller. Um, and yeah, here they obviously it's obviously meant to be much more of a joke because they obviously uh, one of them doesn't like to be shorter than the other. So, but yeah, 3'8". Yeah, you're big boy. But um, and it's also, I mean, it also leads into a reference to what essentially they left out in the Fellowship, but
Which is?
which is the Willow, which is the Old Man Willow, that they're basically getting trapped by this tree, which they actually got trapped in the first book. Actually,
Ah, of course. I never actually even thought of that before.
yeah, that's what they were referencing. They made Old Man Willow part of the Fangorn forest instead of the other forest. So just I mean, it's like a joke basically, because people have been complaining. Well, where is the Tom Bombadil sequence? And yeah, here we get a reference to that. And Treewit is actually given lines of Tom Bombadil here. Away with you! You should not be waking. Eat earth, dig deep, drink water.
I
And
never even noticed that, and I have read these books so many times. Oh, that's embarrassing.
Uh, but it's like unless people are aware of how controversial it is that they left out Tom Bombadil, because when I watched the films in 2001 2003, I didn't think of the fact that they left Tom Bombadil out, because I just felt like, yeah, I mean, these are awesome films, like why would I nitpick this? And essentially, they still managed to at least partly redeem themselves in that regard, even though, to my mind, they didn't need to redeem themselves, because it's not a big loss to me.
Yeah, it's
Um,
not a big loss to me, but then he's not one of my favourite characters. I mean, if they'd
yeah.
completely, I don't know, gotten rid of Faramir, I would have been freaking out.
But it's like, probably it comes down to the fact that people think that the films tend to be much more action films or action oriented than about the mythical dimension of the world and stuff, and the poems and the songs and everything that are part of the story, and people want to have all of that in an adaptation that they would consider to be faithful. And I just go, why, or how does that make dramatic sense? It's like, it's okay, it will please fans of of the source material, but it won't necessarily be a good final product. It won't necessarily come out as a good film if the pacing is slowed down to a halt by people singing songs for 40 minutes, right? It's like what people were complaining about in the first Hobbit film, where they are just the first 40 minutes in Bag End singing the dwarf song, right? That they said, well, this takes a lot of time to get going. And yeah, I feel like this is a similar situation where, you have lots of smaller references in the extended edition to parts that are obviously um, very detailed in the books, but they are not, they cannot be integrated into a 3-act structure in a way that people would like, because a film works differently than a book, obviously.
Yeah, for
So
sure. And I also feel that, I don't know, maybe am I being hypocritical? Because I do get really worked up about changes between Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones.
hmm
And I'm wondering if maybe it's because I first started reading the books like
that's could be.
over a decade before the films came out, so they were so kind of solidified in my mind
hmm
that whatever had happened in the film. So it's like with The Hobbit, actually. Like the
Yeah,
Hobbit movies are so different to the book because they add a lot of material, and just in general,
yeah,
they're really different. And I'm quite relaxed about it. Hobbit 3, I really actually quite enjoyed, but it's just nothing like the book, right? So it's maybe it's that distance, and maybe the reason why I'm so prickly about Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones is because it's so raw. Like it feels like I haven't done enough rereads of the source books to really own, like, internalize them and own them and kind of feel that confidence. Like I'm still the new jealous girlfriend in a way of my material. I'm not confident enough of my relationship yet to
uh,
have my imagery of those characters and those scenes kind of corrupted in a way by watching the TV shows. Whereas I'm
to me,
so much more confident in Tolkien. So much more confident, sorry, in Tolkien.
it's probably to me. I mean, I just read those books once. I don't necessarily have a problem with the TV show, because I mean, narrative economy dictates. I mean, that you have to. I mean, TV is focused on plot, so and since the plot in the books, uh, I mean, that's also been a criticism of the books, is that they are not. Uh, there's a lot of world building but sometimes the story doesn't advance that fast. So yeah, I can see how someone who loves the world and the details would be upset at changes that that look pretty significant. But to me, it's also an idea of, yeah, this is exciting to me, because if you change things, then you have to get to a point in the story in a different way, or you might not even get to that same point at all. In which case, you might you might create something entirely new and original. And to me, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, it's obviously in the eye of the beholder, I would say.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
I find this very, very poignant. Like the flag, obviously falling, flying down to Aragorn and Gandalf. And obviously we missed the scene with Grima Wormtongue, which I also like, because we don't get an interaction between those two characters in the books, right? So this is like a little finger Varys sort of moment for these films, right? Because these are secondary characters that never interact in the books, and so now we basically got, that's also an adaptation choice, because you get some lines that Gandalf says in book 3, they are given to Grima Wormtongue in that scene here, where he basically says that um, that she's like a cold winter morning, and etc. That she basically closes her heart, and that that her life seems to shrink and everything.
But the important point is of that scene, and the reason why I really love it is, Tolkien loves words and he thinks words are powerful, and we
Yes.
know that the voice of Saruman is powerful, but also the voice of Grima Wormtongue, his name Wormtongue. And what I love
Yeah.
about that particular scene is, although it ends with her saying, "Get away from me," you're just you're just a poisonous venom,
Yeah.
but there is that moment, and she's such a good actress, where when he's whispering these words, that you can see her almost giving in. And I think
Yeah.
it's really crucial, and because he looks disgusting in the films, right? But you can see
Yeah.
that even then, the words are so convincing that she almost gives in. And I think, in a way, it makes her much more vulnerable and interesting, and it kind of gives you color for how Theoden probably fell. That
Mm.
you need to see Grima having powerful words. That he's not just
Yeah.
some. I mean, he is just a lackey of Saruman, but that he
Yeah.
has his own agency as well. I think that's a kind of
We need
important.
some scenes we needed some scenes with him before this, because in the books we only meet him here, because everything else is hearsay until this point. Um, and I think it's also like he's basically I mean, there again, like the imagery is not necessarily the most subtle, because obviously he's like the snake in the garden, basically whispering to someone bad advice and stuff, to get them to do things that they wouldn't. I mean, obviously a pretty devilish figure in his own right, but at the same time really pathetic as well, because he just has no chance. I mean, he just doesn't. He doesn't even.
Can we
Uh,
comment on the whole kind of like incompetence of the tower guard who lets in the old
yeah,
man with the
that's
staff?
that's sort of like a that's like a lucky twist of fate, right? Basically that's also something like the most innocuous forms of friendliness can often have big consequences here, because obviously if Gandalf didn't have his staff, maybe he wouldn't have been able to free the king, in a sense.
Oh,
So
in this alternate reality where the king is possessed, yeah.
yeah, yeah,
But it is, I mean, I
it's,
just always thought it was a little bit weak. Like, they
yeah,
need to have him, because now they made it a possession, he has to have the staff to do the exorcism.
yeah. It's
So
like
they have to explain how he's going to get in, and that's
Exorcist
just
reference.
lost. It's just, yeah,
Yeah, Exorcist reference. So, but
definitely.
it's I don't dislike it as much, because obviously um, this is also something that I mean the words are still the same, right?
No, I don't dislike it. I just think it's a little bit silly.
It's um, but yeah, it's obviously it's a bit on the nose with the symbolism, but at the same time, yeah, I mean it's a movie, so
It's
I'm gonna
amaze
I
balls makeup, isn't it, on Theoden? Just seeing it
yeah.
up close again.
And I like, obviously the set design is also very. I mean, we
Oh
haven't.
yeah, man, I love not Helm's Deep.
Yeah, all these banners in the background and stuff. It's very, and that's what I miss in recent epics, like where you wouldn't necessarily have all that detail in the background just to be an enrichment, like for the environment. But yeah, Saruman basically got taught a lesson here. But yeah, no, I think the costuming, and it's all very real. All looks very realistic, and I
I have
think
to
it's
say, I really love the
rejuvenating.
Rohan like heraldry.
Oh yes,
Like it's
yes,
very kind of organic shapes. It's lots of round curlicues, and it's very Celtic, and it's rich reds and greens compared to this very kind of austere silver and black of Minas Tirith. And I just, yeah,
basically Anglo-Saxons, right? A
yeah,
Celt.
I love
That's
Rohan. And
Vikings maybe as well, right? Because they have at least on their roofs, like they have the imagery of like these wooden horse heads and stuff like
yeah,
that. I
very
mean,
much so.
it's all very um, yeah. It creates an atmosphere to me that is very very um, mythical. I would say not not the mythological, but very very that suggests age and um, it's there's some kind of permanence to it.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. That there's lots of heritage. I mean, I think if Peter Jackson said you can take an item, it's like a souvenir item from any part of this world, I wouldn't have taken anything from the Elvish or from Gondor. I would have taken it from Rohan, like one of these
oh,
amazing banners or one of the helmets, maybe. I mean, it's
mhm.
beautifully worked.
Oh yes, and basically Grima trying to get away, but in the
Like
book
little, yeah, it's so
in the
funny.
books actually Grima has to get doesn't Grima have to get the sword for him?
Um,
I think someone has to I think someone has to get the sword for Theoden. Um, and obviously he's much less forgiving here in the film than he is in the books, right? Like, in the books he's much more reasonable with what Grima Wormtongue has done, right? He even says that you will ride with me to Helm's to battle and stuff, and Grima is sort of trying to uh, talk himself out of it, which I would have liked to see, but at the same time I get why they did it this way, because obviously it is about Aragorn's wisdom as a king, even though he is not yet a king. So um, yeah, and so then basically he has to remind Theoden of the gift of mercy,
Indeedy,
and
which is a major, major theme of this film.
mm,
You know, the importance of mercy is, yeah.
and that Theoden basically doesn't actually, I kill him, which is actually, I mean, and that's probably also why people like Christopher Lee in The Return of the King were not that happy about the omission of that famous scene, because that's when this pays off. Um,
Yeah,
so
for sure.
yeah, and so obviously asks where his son is, and this is actually I love this because it's just a procession, right? And um, it's just it's a funeral, but at the same time, I like the fact that they made a song for that in their language that Eowyn is going to sing. Um, and yeah, it's just once again makes the world much more palpable than it would otherwise be. Like if they were just focusing on plot itself, you wouldn't get any of this. You would get like character A does action,
Which is
B
why it's very,
leads the
very
scene.
correctly left out of the original cut, because you don't need it in the
Yeah,
theatrical
I
cut.
didn't
But
need it.
and I think it's also because like the Gondorians throw so much shade on the kind of the peasanty Rohan culture, but it's
Hmm.
nice to see that they have this rich tradition and heritage,
Yeah,
and it's really magisterial. I think it's another great Eowyn moment as well. So
yeah. Because obviously we've been shown since the beginning of the film that she cares about uh her cousin, right?
oh yeah, for sure, for
Um,
sure.
and yeah, we don't actually get to see him be a character in the film, Theodred, but we know what he represents to other characters. and that makes it much more interesting. Uh, and obviously, the graves of the kings have similar meaning on them. So yeah, and this idea basically this gets echoed in the third film, where Theoden is asking Gandalf obviously about the idea why he should continue on, basically, if he has to bury his heir, because there's nothing left for him to live for. And Denethor makes a different decision in the third film, and that's why I think it's pretty interesting, especially because I like Bernard Hill, the actor who plays Theoden.
Yeah, he's
I think
great.
he's not in enough stuff, I feel.
Actually, well, you need
He's been
to.
in Titanic, but
I mentioned Wolf Hall last time we spoke. He plays the Duke of Norfolk in that.
oh yes,
So, but it's weird because the Duke of Norfolk is such a shitbird, right? So, and I'm so used to like
uh,
Theoden being someone like to
yeah,
me, Theoden in this and like in the second in Return of the King is just he's just so admirable and noble and wonderful, and yeah, it's kind of hard to see him being a douchebag in another thing.
yeah, but and then again, this is the only thing that counts.
Yep,
Because this is the one that people are most going to get exposed to anyway.
for
Um,
sure, for sure.
and we see these two kids that we didn't have any I mean, we had some of. I mean, I can say maybe at the beginning when the orcs raided the town, I always had some investment in what happened to them and their family, right? But they are not really characters; they're just sort of plot devices.
Yeah, they're just completely random, I would
Yeah.
say.
And yeah, they're basically talking. I mean, it's also like they talk about a lot of ramifications as to what they're going to do, and I feel that that's also something where people might say, well, why are they just sitting and talking about this stuff? Why aren't they fighting? And because that's the expectation, sadly, that um, fantasy films have built up. Basically, that it's basically just action and uh, big monsters and creatures, etc. That it can't actually be about anything else than that. And yeah, this is sort of the point where that perception turned, and also why we have been getting so many fantasy films in the last
Oh, for sure,
30 years,
for
because
sure.
people have been obviously being blindsided the whole time, where they just said, "Oh well, this is all just like uh, you know all these films like Willow and so on." I mean, it's not Willow is not a bad film, but it's not something that I would call like a very subtle piece of filmmaking. Um, but yeah, this is where people sort of decided to wake up, and this Harry Potter and everything that came after is, I hope, a definite turning point where we won't go back on it to a point where people just like derisively talk about the fantasy genre
But
as
do you
some.
think we've truly gotten out of it?
I don't think we are really out of the woods yet, but we are on a I mean, we're on a good path here. I think we basically, I mean, with at least Guillermo del Toro making Pan's Labyrinth was a big deal.
But
Um,
these are still not movies that win awards. And like there was that weird tweet that came out from, was it tweet or was it like a blog post where George R. R. Martin was like, yeah, whatevs the Emmys, they're just not going to nominate fantasy, basically.
that's probably. I mean, it's. I mean, they will nominate it. I mean, they will nominate the acting. Maybe they will nominate the direct. I mean, the cinematography or something like that. But Lord of the Rings obviously is a departure from all of this, because they got nominated and won lots of awards. But at the same time, when you've seen the recent nominations for this year, you might say, well, do Academy Awards actually mean anything? But we'll see. This, I feel, is something that it's a bit more adult, even though people as young as 12 can read it. Like, but that just suggests that it's timeless and for all ages.
Oh, I read it before I was 12. I just think it's that you get different things from it, right?
Yeah, if you're an adult, you will pay attention to different things than when you were a kid. Usually,
I mean, I'm amazed at
um,
some of the stuff we read in school at that age, like in English literature. So, bits of Shakespeare that's really bawdy. Like when you go back and read it now and you think, my God, or I don't know, reading Anna Karenina, which is basically about an adulterous affair, at its core.
yeah,
And you just think, wow. But I think you just
yeah.
get from it what you need at that age, right?
Yeah, at that age, I'd read like the Three Musketeers and Steinbeck, like of
Yeah, but
my.
there's a lot of bawdy stuff in the Three Musketeers as well.
Yeah, there is, and that's why I feel like fantasy is also being talked about as something that's mainly for kids. Like you get films like Narnia and Into the Woods and that sort of thing, which is much more geared. At least the adaptations are much more geared towards younger children. So, like the most controversial bits I cut out or changed to be a. I mean, it's basically the fact that this is seen. I mean, at least big budget filmmaking is much more transparently a business. So
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
doing business, I mean, doing reaching a wider audience is probably much more important to the people financing these films than making a beautiful film like the Lord of the Rings trilogy, because the Lord of the Rings happened to be something that was a big departure from the way that films were being made, and it's weird to me that that someone got to say, well, you can do whatever you want with this, and that it turned out this good, because sometimes you hear like, oh well, the director gets carte blanche and immediately he indulges in everything and no one can tell him to stop, and that happens sometimes. But this is a clear example of people being given enough creative leeway to make a film that was fairly significant actually for what came later. So
Yeah.
I think that there's a good middle, but fantasy sadly is not at the point of sci-fi where you can basically on a low budget do something that people will say is artful, because with fantasy you have the trappings of having to invent an entire world sometimes with entire entire races of different creatures and stuff. So it's like, and it takes much more money to make a film like this than it would probably take to make a film like, I don't know, Source Code or something like that, right? So yeah, that's why, and yeah, or Under the Skin or something like that. These sci-fi films that are very artsy. I mean, I don't like to use the word artsy, but yeah, films that people can of different ages can look at and say, well, I interpret something different into this. Whereas fantasy films still have a bit of a stigma to them for being for much younger audiences, because there's an innocence to the idea of a different world and a mythology and everything, like. But yeah, at the same
Although I'm
time,
guessing now with George R. R. Martin, that innocence is kind of gone.
yeah, no, I mean, but still, I mean, even after having watched like Game of Thrones and after having read A Song of Ice and Fire, it surprises me how grown up The Lord of the Rings actually is. Even
Yeah,
though
and
it
after all,
doesn't.
what's more grown up? A rather puerile sort of fondness for. I mean, I'm not actually now criticizing A Song of Ice and Fire, but more Game of Thrones. That the kind of puerile obsession with showing like walls with tits.
Yeah,
Is that grown up, or is like a very serious description of what is corruption and what is the power of mercy? Like what is being grown up? Like I think that kind of some of the ethical and religious and philosophical stuff in Lord of the Rings is as grown up.
oh, is there something happening?
No, was I just on mute then?
Oh, I see.
By mistake, maybe.
Because my now we should probably talk about this. They're leaving uh, Edoras.
Yeah, this is pretty
Uh,
major. Let's get
yeah,
let's get
it's
back
like
to the film.
this would be sort of like in a Viking documentary or something, like where people just march across large plains and large fields and everything, like in en masse, right? So um, and here we also get another departure from the book because they wanted to inject this into the story. They are obviously flee. They're in the film. They're obviously fleeing, and they're taking the old people with them. But in the book, they leave them at what's it called again? The mountain fortress.
Helm's Deep.
No, not Helm's Deep, but where they leave the women and children.
Oh, yeah. No, I know what you mean. Let me
Um,
just Google it.
yeah, and so I feel that as you said earlier, in the books, it's a much more proactive decision. Like they actually want to go to Helm's Deep to fight because they know that it's a much better option for them to go there. But at the same time, they don't take the small children and I don't think if I remember correctly, they don't take the small children and the women with them
No,
uh,
no, no.
on that trip. So they leave them somewhere else. Let's just say that. And yeah, here in the film, they obviously, uh, Grima and Saruman anticipate this, and they send Wag riders to greet them. So
Which is just so ridiculous.
I know actually in the books they sort of say that Grima Wormtongue has been sighted with riding across the land with orcs on wolves and stuff. So they probably just decided, yeah, well, there's a warg attack at the entrance of the Mines of Moria in the books, but we will not have it there. We'll put the warg attack into the Two Towers. That's how I always felt it. I mean, that's how I always rationalize it to say it like that. But I like that that detail basically that they decide to go with the wargs because we haven't seen them yet. I mean, we would have gotten them in the first film if they had used that, but at the same time, that would have felt like too much stuff. Here, it makes sense because you want to increase the peril that the people are in, right? So,
But I feel a lot of this is just very cheap manipulation. Like it's sort of, well, let's
huh?
take the women and children on the road, and then that means that when we have the Battle of Helm's Deep, we can show like scared little children, and it's
but
just,
no, but yeah, but I mean, Spielberg does that a lot too, right? It's not something
yeah,
that.
but that's not a recommendation. I mean, I hate Steven Spielberg. I think he's just utterly schmaltzy and just
I, I
produces
I
these
like
terrible films.
I like Jurassic Park though.
Yeah, it has dinosaurs, but come on, like Steven Spielberg films will not outlast him. They really
But
won't.
we should talk about this. This is awesome acting from Andy Serkis, right? As
Yeah.
two personalities of Gollum, which this is an interesting way to shoot it as well. It's sometimes you would, I mean, in the third film they use the reflection in the water, right?
Oh, the way they do kind of like flipping the side of the screen for the different
Yeah,
personalities.
it's like they're really talking to each other, which is an interesting way to show uh, schizophrenia, I think,
Mm.
because that's essentially what Gollum is. He's schizophrenic.
And
Uh,
Smeagol just as this sort of like oppressed,
yeah,
sweet little nervous man. Oh, it's just
yeah,
heartbreaking. And
yeah.
I think this is like, so again, like this is not simplistic to show this personality so riven and so tortured, so corrupted, and yet with this like little nugget of innocence at its heart. I mean,
Yeah.
this to me equals anything in Shakespeare or Tolstoy for just
Oh,
tragedy.
yeah. Because at least in the film, they try to make you think that it's actually going to end well for him here because he's casting aside the Gollum personality for a while.
For a
Uh,
while.
yeah, and so when it comes back, I mean, it comes back. At least in the film, it's implied, as a result of what will come later in the film. So it's not a surprise necessarily that he would slide back into that because that's basically I think it's sort of a defense mechanism as well, right? It's sort of the idea that this other guy, he can handle this better. He knows what to do. Um,
I just
I,
think that ultimately that damage wrought by the ring can never truly be undone. So
no, no.
just as Frodo can't truly recover from his hurt, or Bilbo now is aged, and there is the kernel of goodness for him, but it's gone too far now.
Yeah, and yeah, even as Frodo is happy that Gollum is helping them here, he's sort of like, yeah, he's breaking this rabbit's neck and he's eating it like that. And obviously Sam is having none of it. And
Oh, rabbit stew.
rabbits too. Yeah. Oh yeah,
The
that's
girls who did the Inn at the Crossroads, I think one of them's now doing a sort of cook your way through Lord of the Rings.
oh
But
really?
but I always felt there was much less sort of scope because it's a very simple fare
Yeah.
once you leave the Shire. But
Yeah, not much game out there. Is it?
just a lot of lembas bread, right?
Yeah. I mean, oh yeah, that's also something like the what's this?
Batatas. I'm still in Portuguese, right? So
Ah, yeah.
batatas grandes e douradas, como un velo. Oh God.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is one of the
Obviously,
more
it's all
surreal experiences of watching
having
this
none
one
of
I've
it.
had.
Like,
Yeah, but it's kind of cute. I
yeah,
mean,
no, that's what I mean. Like, I mean, at least from the design point of view, it's less creepy at points and much more like, it's kind of like E.T., where you think about, oh, this is just a small, cute little alien lost somewhere. Um, and yeah, sort of Gollum, like, because that's why you have in Disney films, you have characters with small noses and big eyes. Like,
yeah, for
that's
sure.
something that people were worried, that they were worried about when designing it as well. I think they didn't want to make it too cutesy. They wanted to make him much more weird, which is a good place to go for that character. But here we have the Haradrim basically coming through the woods.
Again, good outfits here.
Yeah, but they are obviously much more inspired by Middle Eastern Africa, or maybe also African.
I don't know if you look at old pictures of like Genghis Khan and his hordes. I mean, you'll see that kind of similar headdress and stuff.
Oh, could be, yeah.
Yeah.
It's. I mean, basically basically the headscarf and stuff like that. It's not just something that's worn in Middle Eastern countries. It's basically in there are different parts of Asia where
Hey, Olifante. Is
yeah,
this a place where we need to talk about charges of racism that, like,
woman kill. Yeah, that's. I mean, we can talk about it. It's basically no secret that people have a lot of problems with the way that Tolkien describes the Haradrim and the men on Sauron's side specifically, right? Where they're basically all dark,
Yeah.
they're mostly dark skinned.
It's like the other, the exotic, the oriental is somehow kind of to be feared and savage and brutal.
Yeah, but we don't get a sense of. I mean, we don't actually see them in detail, and maybe that's also something we should have. I mean,
Yay,
he doesn't
Faramir.
spend any time with them as well. He just sort of mentions them in passing most of the time.
But I
And
think it's more just the logic of the geography of his world.
yeah,
Like,
sure. They're next to Mordor. Like the bad neighbor has a bad influence on them.
I mean,
So
I wouldn't want to ascribe him liberal contemporary views. He was obviously a man of his time, but
um,
have we, by the way, ended the first disc? I don't, because I'm watching on iPad, so
yeah, I've finished here.
okay.
It's the idea, but it's also something that the film itself addresses here in this last scene at least. Where Faramir talks about it. I mean, it's like the idea of saying, like, from their point of view, we are evil, right? So they are convinced that they're doing the right thing, and this is something that
Absolutely.
is not necessarily. I mean, in the books, right? It's not something that is
Yeah,
flip.
his attitude is very anachronistic, I think, but
Yeah.
it's an interesting position.
It's also something maybe meant to sort of soften the. I mean, to sort of appease people who are critical of this aspect of Lord of the Rings, basically. And I think it's the films, especially, I think the films, if they are
portraying like the Haradrim and the Easterlings and whatever in a very, I mean, and maybe also we could talk about the orcs, basically the orcs being like totally evil and not shown to be redeemable in the films as well. You could say, well, there's this entire race of creatures that are just evil because they're just evil. But I think it's also important to note that the idea of people being absolutely evil, by nature is something that the character of Gollum basically refutes.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And so, but yeah, I can see why people have problems with it. But at the same time, I think the films they didn't invent anything that wasn't already problematic in the material in the first place. So I'm not sure the films themselves, if they're adapting this sort of story, can be can be held accountable for what is problem in the source material. So,
but then I think that in a way that positioning of Faramir's comment about, I'm sure this guy who we think of as our enemy in his own mind is doing the right thing. I think that has been very deliberately put there, this anachronistic comment by contemporary writers, in a way to counter any accusations that they might be saying that these guys are all bad and evil, right? I mean, they're kind of like undermining that potential racism. It's like they're addressing it full on before you even have a chance to be offended.
Yeah.
But it does feel a bit weird. It's almost like someone outside of the film commenting on it, which is bizarre in a way. A very serious discussion upon which we end our podcast.
I'm just it's because like the issues of racism in Tolkien's work are still hotly debated.
So I think we've talked past the ending of the first disc, if you're watching it on DVD, of Stewed Herbs and Rabbits. So once again, I hope this has been somehow insightful and entertaining. I want to thank Beric175, aka Matthieu, for joining once again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And once again, just to close out by saying that if you are interested in Lord of the Rings and Tolkien and exploring that as well, then do check out Vassals of Kingsgrave podcast, VOK podcast. Google that and you should get there because they've done really interesting, in-depth work on this. Cool. Thanks for joining. Bye.
Bye.